Janitors don't get business accounts here. The bank teller, Keisha Davis's voice boomed through the elegant space like thunder, her massive frame towering over a black woman who stood perfectly still despite the storm raging around her. The black woman, Vanessa Williams, looked up with eyes that held depths nobody in that room could fathom. Her voice cut through the hysteria like a blade. "You have no idea who you're talking to." But Keisha was beyond reason. "I know exactly what you are. Another cleaning lady trying to play pretend. Get your lying, scheming hands off my counter." Keisha Davis's voice boomed through the elegant space like thunder. But what the bank teller didn't know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her career when she discovered who the woman she called a liar and a janitor really is. This story has the biggest karma you've ever seen. As we start this story, if you believe everyone should be respected no matter the color of their skin, hit that subscribe button right now, type respect, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Vanessa Williams was the CEO and founder of Williams Tech Solutions, a technology empire worth $47 billion. While most people her age were still paying off student loans, Vanessa had built an empire that rivaled Silicon Valley's biggest names. But she was reclusive by choice, deliberately avoiding the spotlight. No magazine covers, no Forbes interviews, no red carpet appearances. She conducted business in private boardrooms and exclusive meetings, known only to the most elite circles of corporate America, the kind of people who moved billions with handshake deals and whose faces never appeared in public. The work badge clipped to her faded jacket wasn't some janitor's ID, it was her executive access pass to one of her own subsidiary companies, where she'd spent the morning conducting surprise inspections. She did this regularly, staying connected to every level of her vast empire, remembering when she couldn't afford to disconnect from any detail of her operations. Vanessa wore the faded jeans to the bank because she didn't want any special attention. Keisha, the white bank teller, had been grinding at Morrison Financial for 12 brutal years. At 35, standing 5'8" and weighing 200 pounds, she'd learned to use her physical presence as a weapon against customers she deemed unworthy. Keisha had deep-seated prejudices about black women in service jobs. In her twisted logic, her position at this prestigious bank elevated her above janitors, cleaning staff, anyone who worked with their hands. She'd become the gatekeeper who kept people out. The person who made others feel worthless, perpetuating a cycle of cruelty that was about to come full circle in the most devastating way possible. So when Vanessa walked through those glass doors that Tuesday morning, she stepped into a perfect storm of prejudice and resentment that had been building for over a decade. Vanessa entered Morrison Financial quietly, approaching the teller windows with a simple goal: open a personal checking account separate from her complex corporate banking. The bank was a cathedral of wealth. Italian marble floors, crystal chandeliers, mahogany panels that screamed old money and exclusivity. She'd chosen this branch for personal reasons. This was her old neighborhood, where she'd once pressed her face against these same glass doors as a hungry teenager, dreaming of having enough money to walk through them with dignity. Now she could buy the entire building without checking her balance, but she still remembered that scared kid looking in from the outside. The moment Keisha spotted the work badge clipped to Vanessa's jacket, everything changed. Without reading it, without asking questions, she decided who Vanessa was and where she belonged. Anywhere but inside Morrison Financial. "This is a premium bank, not where the help comes to cash paychecks," Keisha called out before Vanessa even reached the window, her voice carrying across the marble lobby with practiced authority. Vanessa paused, recognizing the tone immediately. She'd heard it before, survived it before, knew exactly how this was supposed to play out. "I'd like to open a personal checking account," she said quietly, placing her ID on the counter with careful dignity. But Keisha was just getting started. "Sweetheart," she said, loading the word with condescension, "you're in the wrong place. The check cashing place is down the street. This is Morrison Financial, We serve a very different clientele." The pause before clientele was loaded with meaning everyone understood. This wasn't about banking. This was about who belonged and who didn't, about hierarchy and social order. "I understand this is Morrison Financial," Vanessa replied, her voice calm, but with undertones that suggested depths Keisha couldn't fathom. "I'd still like to open an account." That's when Keisha made her first catastrophic mistake. Instead of processing the request professionally, she doubled down with absolute confidence. "Look, honey, I'm trying to help you here. Our minimum balance requirements are substantial. Our fees are designed for people with significant assets. You'd be much more comfortable at a community bank somewhere more appropriate for your situation." Each word was designed to shame Vanessa about her appearance, embarrass her about her perceived poverty, make her feel small in this temple of wealth. Keisha was performing now, demonstrating her authority to the gathering audience. But she had no idea she was facing someone who'd built billion-dollar empires, who'd negotiated with world leaders, who'd survived corporate warfare that would have destroyed weaker people. A bank teller's condescension was nothing compared to the storms Vanessa had weathered and conquered. Have you ever been judged based on your appearance before someone even knew your name? Hit the subscribe button and share your experience in the comments, because what happened next shows exactly how dangerous those assumptions can be. What happened next would go down as the most catastrophic few minutes in banking history. Because once Keisha Davis had tasted blood in the water, once she'd established her dominance over what she believed was just another cleaning lady trying to reach above her station, she couldn't stop herself from going for the kill. Keisha snatched Vanessa's identification card from the marble counter, holding it up to the light like she was examining evidence of a crime. Her eyes swept over every detail with theatrical suspicion, her lips curling into a sneer that grew more pronounced with each passing second. "So you clean offices at some tech company? That's nice," Keisha said, her voice dripping with condescension as she waved the ID card in the air. "But here's the thing you don't seem to understand. Janitors don't need business accounts. This is for real business people, professionals who actually contribute something meaningful to society." The words hit the elegant lobby like poison, spreading through the gathered crowd of customers who'd stopped their own transactions to watch this public execution unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their expensive shoes and adjusting their designer handbags. But none of them spoke up. None of them intervened. They were all complicit in their silence, enablers of the cruelty being unleashed on someone they'd already dismissed as unworthy of their concern. Vanessa stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her, maintaining the kind of professional composure that comes from years of surviving situations where one wrong move could destroy everything. But if you looked closely, really closely, you could see the slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in her jaw that suggested she was fighting to control something much more powerful than anger. "How much do you make mopping floors?" Keisha continued, her voice getting louder and more aggressive with each word. 20,000 a year? 15? Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You scrape together a few $100s and now you think you can play in the big leagues with people who actually matter. She leaned forward across the counter, using every inch of her considerable height and weight to intimidate the much smaller woman standing before her. "Girls like you should stick to basic checking accounts at community banks. You know, places that cater to your demographic. Places where they don't ask too many questions about where your money really comes from." The racial undertones were becoming more obvious now, the coded language that everyone in that lobby understood perfectly. This wasn't just about perceived class differences anymore. This was about who belonged in spaces of wealth and power based on the color of their skin and the assumptions people made about what that meant. But Vanessa remained silent, still giving Keisha every opportunity to step back from the edge of the cliff she was sprinting toward with absolute confidence. She could have ended this with a single phone call, could have revealed her identity, and watched Keisha's world crumble in real time. But something inside her needed to see how far this would go, needed to witness the full extent of the cruelty that people were capable of when they thought their victims were powerless to fight back. And Keisha, interpreting that silence as weakness rather than the calm before a hurricane, decided to escalate even further. "Let me guess," she said, her voice now carrying across the entire lobby, ensuring that every customer, every employee, every security guard could hear her systematic destruction of another human being's dignity. "You clean toilets at Williams Tech? Probably think you're real important, 'cause you get to empty their trash cans and scrub their floors." The mention of Williams Tech should have been a warning sign, a massive red flag that might have given a more observant person pause. But Keisha was too drunk on her own power, too intoxicated by this rare moment of feeling superior to someone else, to notice the slight shift in Vanessa's expression. "Skinny little cleaning lady thinking she belongs with real professionals," Keisha continued, her attacks becoming more personal and vicious. "I bet you don't even have a high school diploma, do you? Probably dropped out to start having babies, then realized you needed some kind of job to pay the bills." She was improvising now, creating an entire fictional backstory for Vanessa based on nothing but her own prejudices and assumptions. Each word was designed to cut deeper, to inflict maximum psychological damage, to ensure that this uppity cleaning lady would never forget her place in the social hierarchy. "Looking like you haven't eaten since your last paycheck," Keisha added with a cruel laugh, zeroing in on Vanessa's thin frame with the precision of a predator going for the throat. "Maybe if you spent less money trying to look important and more on actual food, you wouldn't look like a scarecrow in designer knockoffs." Around them, other Morrison Financial employees had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion and the increasingly loud confrontation. Some looked genuinely uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, their faces showing the kind of second-hand embarrassment that comes from watching someone else's complete meltdown. But they remained silent, paralyzed by corporate hierarchy and the unspoken understanding that challenging Keisha might put their own jobs at risk. That's when Marcus Thompson, the branch manager, finally decided to make his appearance. But instead of de-escalating the situation, instead of showing leadership and putting a stop to the public humiliation of a potential customer, he did something that would haunt him for the rest of his career. "Keisha's right," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of management and the cowardice of someone who'd rather enable cruelty than risk confrontation. "This might not be the right fit for our institution. We pride ourselves on serving clients who understand the prestige and exclusivity of Morrison Financial." His words were the gasoline that turned Keisha's smoldering cruelty into a raging inferno. With management backing her up, with her authority officially sanctioned by the very people who should have been protecting customers from exactly this kind of treatment, she felt invincible. And that's when Vanessa made her move. Without saying a word, maintaining that same impossible calm that had carried her through the entire ordeal, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Simple, elegant, understated, the kind of card that whispered power rather than shouting it. She placed it on the marble counter between them with the same careful dignity she'd shown from the very beginning. Keisha's eyes locked onto that card like a missile finding its target. For just a moment, there was silence in the lobby, the kind of pregnant pause that comes right before everything explodes into chaos. Then Keisha erupted into laughter. It wasn't just laughter, it was a sound of pure, unadulterated mockery that echoed off the marble walls and crystal chandeliers like breaking glass. She doubled over, clutching her sides, gasping for breath between waves of hysterical amusement. "You stole this from someone's desk, didn't you?" She managed to gasp out between laughs, picking up the business card and waving it around like evidence of the most pathetic crime imaginable. "This is Williams Tech Solutions. This is a real company, with real executives, real professionals. She was performing for the crowd now, milking every moment of what she believed was her ultimate triumph. Cleaning ladies don't have business cards, sweetheart. What's next? Gonna tell me you're the CEO? Gonna claim you own the whole company? The mockery in her voice was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She was practically in tears from laughing so hard, completely convinced that she'd caught Vanessa in the most obvious lie imaginable. Around the lobby, some customers were starting to chuckle along with her, caught up in the mob mentality of watching someone get torn apart for their presumption. But then Vanessa did something that should have stopped everyone cold. "I'd like to speak with your manager," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the laughter like a blade through silk. And that's when Keisha made the fatal mistake that would destroy everything. "Demanding managers now?" she shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that made everyone in the lobby wince. "This is typical help behavior right here. When you get caught lying, when you get exposed for the fraud you are, you demand to speak to someone in charge like that's gonna save you." She was completely unhinged now, drunk on power, and convinced of her own righteousness. The business card was still clutched in her hand, and as her rage reached its crescendo, she did something that would echo through the financial world for years to come. She tore it in half. Then she tore Vanessa's ID card in half too. The sound of tearing plastic cut through the lobby like a gunshot. Pieces of identification and business cards fluttered to the marble floor like broken dreams, and Keisha stood over them like a conquering warrior, her chest heaving with righteous indignation. "Take your stolen documents and get out," she screamed, her voice echoing off every surface in the elegant space. "We don't give accounts to office cleaners pretending to be executives. This is Morrison Financial, not some charity organization for delusional janitors with big dreams." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in that lobby, customers, employees, security guards, stood frozen in shock at what they just witnessed. The destruction of someone's identification documents was crossing a line that even the most prejudiced observers recognized as absolutely unacceptable. But Keisha wasn't done. Standing over the scattered pieces of plastic and paper, she delivered what she thought was her killing blow. "Security. Escort this woman out of our bank. She's been trying to defraud us with stolen documents and fake business cards. She's probably casing the joint for a robbery." And that's when everything changed. Because as security guards started moving toward them, as other customers pulled out their phones to record what they thought was just another viral moment of public humiliation, as Marcus Thompson prepared to back up his employee's decision to have Vanessa forcibly removed from the premises, something shifted in the air itself. Vanessa Williams, CEO of a $47 billion empire, the woman who'd been dismissed as nothing more than a cleaning lady. The person whose dignity had been systematically destroyed for the past 25 minutes, finally decided it was time to show them exactly who they'd been dealing with. The explosion was about to begin, and when the smoke cleared, Morrison Financial Bank would never be the same again. What happened next would prove that, sometimes, the person you're destroying has the power to destroy everything you've built in return. And sometimes, justice comes not with thunder and lightning, but with quiet words that shake the very foundations of everything you thought you understood about power. What would you do if someone tore your ID and business card and threw it on the floor? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The reckoning was about to begin. Because when someone has been pushed beyond their breaking point, when their dignity has been systematically destroyed in front of a crowd of witnesses, there are two ways they can respond. They can explode in rage and fury, or they can become something far more terrifying, absolutely, perfectly calm. Vanessa Williams chose calm. In complete silence, she knelt down on that pristine marble floor and began collecting the torn pieces of her identification card. Each movement was deliberate, methodical, almost meditative in its precision. She gathered every fragment, every scrap of plastic that Keisha had thrown at her feet like garbage, and placed them carefully in her palm. The silence was more terrifying than any scream could have been. Around the lobby, conversations had stopped entirely. Even Keisha, still high on her moment of triumph, began to feel something shift in the atmosphere. Something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up with primitive warning. Vanessa stood slowly, brushing dust from her worn jeans, and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved across the screen with the kind of practiced efficiency that spoke of someone who'd built empires one decision at a time. "James," she said quietly, her voice so calm it was almost hypnotic, "implement Protocol 7. The words were spoken so softly that only those closest to her could hear them. But there was something in her tone, something final and irrevocable, that made everyone in earshot lean in to listen more carefully. "Morrison Financial," she continued, still in that same deadly quiet voice. "Yes, all of it. Every account, every contract, every subsidiary, every partnership, terminate everything, effective immediately." But Keisha, still drunk on her own perceived victory, still convinced that she'd successfully put this uppity cleaning lady in her place, couldn't resist one more twist of the knife. "Calling your supervisor to complain about the mean bank lady?" she taunted, her voice carrying across the lobby with practiced cruelty. "Go ahead. Tell them their janitor got her feelings hurt because someone finally told her the truth about where she belongs." She was laughing again, that same harsh sound that had echoed through the lobby moments before, completely oblivious to the fact that she was mocking someone who had just set in motion events that would destroy everything she'd ever worked for. "Maybe they'll give you a nice participation trophy for trying to play pretend with the grown-ups," Keisha continued, feeding off the nervous laughter of some customers who still thought they were witnessing nothing more than a difficult customer being handled appropriately. But across the lobby, something very different was happening. Angela Rodriguez, a 24-year-old junior teller who'd been watching this confrontation with growing horror, had pulled out her own phone and was frantically typing search terms into Google. "Williams Tech Solutions CEO," she typed with shaking fingers. The first result that popped up was an obscure business journal article from 6 months ago, featuring a photo from an exclusive tech conference that only the most elite industry leaders attended. And there, standing between the CEOs of Apple and Microsoft, shaking hands with world leaders and venture capitalists, was the exact same woman who was currently being humiliated in their lobby. Angela's face went white as printer paper. She scrolled frantically through more results. Forbes articles, Businessweek features, SEC filings worth billions of dollars. Every single source confirmed the same impossible truth. The woman Keisha had been destroying for the past half hour was Vanessa Williams, founder and CEO of Williams Tech Solutions, one of the most powerful technology companies in the world. "Sir," Angela called out desperately, trying to get Marcus Thompson's attention. "Sir, I think we made a terrible mistake." But Marcus was still basking in the glow of having supported his star employee's decisive action. He waved Angela off dismissively, his attention focused on what he believed was the successful removal of an undesirable customer. "Angela, don't let her manipulate you too," he said with patronizing authority. "Some people are very good at playing victim when they get caught in their lies. This is exactly why we have policies about documentation and verification." Angela stared at her phone screen in growing panic, watching search result after search result confirm that they had just committed corporate suicide in the most public way possible. She tried again, her voice more urgent this time. "Mr. Thompson, please, you need to see this. This woman, she's not." "That's enough, Angela," Marcus cut her off sharply. "I don't want to hear another word about it. Keisha handled the situation perfectly, and I'm proud of her for maintaining our standards." But while Marcus was congratulating himself on a job well done, something catastrophic was happening 3 floors above them in the executive offices of Morrison Financial. Patricia Morrison Hayes, president of the bank and heir to a financial dynasty that stretched back 4 generations, was in her corner office reviewing quarterly reports when her phone started ringing. Not the gentle chime of her direct line, but the harsh, insistent buzz of the emergency line that only rang when something had gone terribly, catastrophically wrong. "Miss Morrison Hayes," her assistant's voice was breathless with panic. "We have a situation. Williams Tech Solutions is on line 1. They're saying they want to terminate their contract, all of it, $10.2 billion. Patricia's blood turned to ice in her veins. Williams Tech wasn't just their largest client. They were the foundation upon which Morrison Financial's entire growth strategy was built. Losing that contract wouldn't just hurt their quarterly numbers, it would trigger a financial avalanche that could destroy the bank entirely. "That's impossible," Patricia said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "We just renewed that contract 6 months ago. It's locked in for 5 years. They can't just—" "Ma'am?" Her assistant interrupted, something she'd never done in 15 years of working together. "They're saying there's been an incident in the main lobby. Something about Ms. Williams herself being mistreated." The phone slipped from Patricia's fingers and clattered onto her mahogany desk. Vanessa Williams, the reclusive tech genius who avoided public appearances and conducted business through private meetings and exclusive conferences. The woman who'd specifically requested to handle her personal banking at Morrison Financial because of their reputation for discretion and professionalism. Patricia's legs were moving before her brain had fully processed what was happening. She ran through the executive corridors, her designer heels clicking against marble floors like machine gun fire, her heart pounding with a rhythm that spelled out disaster with every beat. She burst through the lobby doors like a force of nature, her eyes immediately scanning the crowd for the one face that could save or destroy everything. And there, standing in the center of the elegant space with torn identification scattered at her feet, was Vanessa Williams. Patricia recognized her instantly. They'd met at exclusive CEO roundtables, private business dinners, industry conferences that existed in a rarefied atmosphere of power and influence that most people never even knew existed. Vanessa was younger than most of the other tech leaders, quieter, more reserved, but there was something about her presence that commanded respect from even the most arrogant billionaires. And now she was standing in Patricia's lobby, looking like she'd been put through a meat grinder, with Keisha Davis hovering nearby wearing an expression of smug satisfaction that made Patricia's stomach turn with dread. "Miss Williams," Patricia breathed, her voice barely above a whisper, as the full magnitude of the disaster began to sink in. "Oh dear God. What has happened here?" The transformation in the lobby's atmosphere was instantaneous and absolute. Every conversation stopped. Every movement ceased. The very air seemed to crystallize as employees and customers alike sensed that something monumental was occurring, something that would change everything for everyone in that room. Patricia's immediate deference to the woman they'd all dismissed as a cleaning lady sent shockwaves through the crowd. Here was the president of Morrison Financial, a woman who commanded respect from senators and Supreme Court justices, treating this janitor with the kind of reverence usually reserved for heads of state. "I am so profoundly sorry," Patricia continued, her voice shaking with genuine terror as she took in the scene. The torn identification, the scattered business card pieces, the expression of absolute calm on Vanessa's face that somehow conveyed more menace than any explosion of rage could have managed. But Keisha, still operating in the reality she'd constructed where she was the hero of this story, couldn't process what she was witnessing. "You know this cleaning lady?" she asked, her voice carrying the same condescending tone she'd been using all morning, completely oblivious to the fact that she was speaking to her boss's boss. Patricia turned toward Keisha with an expression of horror so profound it was almost physically painful to witness. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 4 generations of banking tradition crashing down in real time. "This is Vanessa Williams," Patricia said, each word hitting the lobby like a sledgehammer blow. "CEO and founder of Williams Tech Solutions. She's worth $47 billion. She is our single largest client, representing 30% of our total assets under management." The silence that followed was so complete it felt like the entire world had stopped breathing. Keisha's face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical if they weren't documenting the destruction of a human being's entire reality. Confusion gave way to disbelief. Disbelief transformed into dawning horror, and horror collapsed into complete devastation as the truth finally penetrated her consciousness. Marcus Thompson felt his knees buckle as he realized that his entire career, 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder, building relationships, establishing his reputation, had just been obliterated by 30 minutes of spectacular poor judgment. Angela Rodriguez, vindicated but terrified, clutched her phone like a lifeline as she watched the most powerful people in the building discover that they'd just committed financial suicide in the most public way possible. But it was Vanessa's response that would haunt everyone in that lobby for the rest of their lives. She didn't scream. She didn't rage. She didn't gloat or threaten or demand immediate satisfaction. Instead, she began to speak in that same calm, quiet voice that had characterized her entire demeanor from the moment she'd walked through the doors. "Your employee assumed I was a janitor because I'm black," she said, each word falling into the silence like stones into still water. She said cleaning ladies don't deserve business accounts because this bank is for real business people. The recounting was surgical in its precision, devastating in its calm delivery. She questioned my income, asking how much I make mopping floors. She told me girls like me should stick to community banks. She said I probably stole my business card from someone's desk because cleaning ladies don't have business cards. With each revelation, Patricia's face grew paler. Marcus sank deeper into his own personal hell, and Keisha began to understand that she hadn't just made a mistake. She destroyed herself and everyone around her with 30 minutes of unbridled cruelty. "When I asked to speak with a manager," Vanessa continued, "she said it was typical help behavior and proceeded to tear up my identification documents while screaming that you don't give accounts to office cleaners pretending to be executives." Keisha tried desperately to salvage something from the wreckage of her life. "I didn't mean. I thought. I'm so sorry, I didn't know who you were." But Vanessa's response cut through her, pleading like a laser through tissue paper. "You thought exactly what you wanted to think," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent a lifetime dealing with people's assumptions and prejudices. "You saw a black woman in simple clothes and decided she was beneath your notice, beneath your respect, beneath your basic human decency." Patricia was offering everything now. Immediate termination of everyone involved, personal apologies, complete policy overhauls, financial compensation, anything and everything that might salvage the relationship that kept her bank alive. But Vanessa Williams had already made her decision. The call to James hadn't been a bluff or a negotiating tactic. It had been the implementation of consequences that were now irreversible. "The contract is terminated," she said with finality that echoed through the marble lobby like a death knell. "This conversation is over." And with those words, Morrison Financial Bank began its descent into financial ruin. Keisha Davis watched her career and reputation crumble into dust. And Marcus Thompson discovered that enabling cruelty comes with a price that can destroy everything you've spent your life building. The most expensive lesson in respect in banking history was complete, and the woman they dismissed as just a cleaning lady walked out of that lobby having proven that sometimes the person you're stepping on today owns the ground you'll be begging to stand on tomorrow. Would you have terminated the contract too, or would you forgive the bank? Tell us in the comments and hit the subscribe button now, because this story holds far more details than this. The silence that followed Vanessa Williams as she walked out of Morrison Financial Bank was the kind of quiet that comes after explosions, after earthquakes, after the moment when everything you thought you knew about the world gets turned completely upside down. Her footsteps echoed across the marble floor one final time, each sound marking the end of an era for everyone left behind in that devastated lobby. Patricia Morrison Hayes collapsed into the nearest chair, her legs finally giving out under the weight of what had just transpired. 4 generations of her family had built Morrison Financial into one of the most prestigious banking institutions in the country. And she just watched 30 minutes of employee misconduct destroy it all. The woman who'd commanded boardrooms filled with Fortune 500 CEOs, who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals with heads of state, sat there staring at the torn pieces of identification scattered across her marble floor like confetti from her own funeral. The tears that ran down Patricia's face weren't just tears of regret. They were tears of absolute devastation, as she realized that everything her great-grandfather had built, everything her grandfather had expanded, everything her father had modernized, and everything she'd spent her entire career protecting had just been obliterated by 30 minutes of unchecked prejudice from 2 employees who should have known better. Around her, the elegant lobby that had once symbolized prestige and exclusivity now felt like a mausoleum. The crystal chandeliers that had witnessed handshake deals worth billions now cast their light on the wreckage of a reputation that could never be rebuilt. The Italian marble floors that had been walked by presidents and prime ministers were now stained with the blood of institutional suicide. The immediate aftermath was swift and brutal, like watching a controlled demolition in reverse. Instead of careful planning bringing down a structure, this was decades of careful construction being destroyed by explosive incompetence. Security guards, the same ones who'd been called to escort Vanessa out as a fraud, now found themselves escorting Keisha Davis from the premises as a terminated employee. There was no ceremony, no opportunity for explanations or apologies, no chance to clean out her desk or say goodbye to colleagues who now looked at her like she'd contracted a contagious disease that might destroy their careers too. 12 years of employment ended in 12 minutes of security footage being reviewed. 12 minutes of Patricia Morrison Hayes realizing that every single word Vanessa had spoken was captured on their surveillance cameras in high definition. 12 minutes of understanding that Keisha Davis had just committed the most expensive hate crime in banking history, while being recorded from 6 different angles. The security guards who escorted Keisha out weren't rough or vindictive. They were professional, almost gentle, as if they understood they were witnessing the destruction of a human being's entire life, and took no pleasure in it. But their gentleness somehow made it worse, highlighting the contrast between how Vanessa had been treated and how even a disgraced former employee was being treated with more dignity than Morrison Financial's biggest client had received. Marcus Thompson's fate was somehow even more devastating than outright termination. He was demoted immediately to entry-level teller, stripped of his management title, his corner office, his authority, his respect, his parking space, his key card access to executive floors, his invitation to management meetings. He would spend the remaining years of his career, however long that might last, in an industry where word travels fast and reputations die hard, serving the very customers he'd once looked down upon, a daily reminder to everyone in the bank of what happens when you enable cruelty instead of stopping it. The demotion meant Marcus would go from making 6 figures to barely scraping by on an entry-level salary. His mortgage payments would become impossible. His children's private school tuition would have to be abandoned. His wife's respect would evaporate along with their social standing. He'd become a cautionary tale whispered about in banking circles, the manager who destroyed his career by backing the wrong horse in the worst possible way. But the real devastation was just beginning to unfold. spreading through the financial world like a virus that no amount of corporate damage control could contain. Within hours, news of the incident spread through the financial sector like wildfire, carried by social media, financial journalists, corporate gossip networks, and the viral video footage that dozens of customers had captured on their phones. In an industry where reputation is everything, where trust is the only currency that really matters, Morrison Financial had just proven they couldn't be trusted to treat a single customer with basic human dignity. If they could destroy someone worth $47 billion over assumptions about her appearance, what did that say about how they'd treat everyone else? The story went viral with the kind of speed and intensity usually reserved for celebrity scandals and political corruption. #banking while black started trending within 6 hours. Morrison Financial scandal followed close behind. Janitor CEO became a rallying cry for people sharing their own stories of being judged based on appearance rather than ability. Financial news networks picked up the story and ran with it like their ratings depended on it. CNBC led with banking giant loses billions over racist incident. Bloomberg headlined, Morrison Financial faces collapse after discriminating against tech CEO. Fox Business went with woke banking, how political correctness costs shareholders everything. Every network found an angle that fit their audience, but they all agreed on one thing. This was the biggest corporate meltdown of the year. The stock market's response was immediate and merciless. Morrison Financial's share price didn't just fall. It collapsed in a way that made veteran traders reach for their antacids and retirement planners start making emergency phone calls to their clients. 45% overnight, the kind of free fall that bankrupts pension funds and destroys retirement accounts built over decades of careful investing. Investors fled like rats from a sinking ship, understanding that a bank that had just lost its largest client over pure prejudice was a bank with no future worth investing in. Institutional investors pulled their money. Mutual funds dumped their Morrison Financial holdings. Even the most loyal shareholders, people whose families had owned Morrison stock for generations, began calling their brokers with sell orders. The financial media had a field day that stretched into weeks of coverage. Banking while black, the billion-dollar discrimination case that shocked Wall Street. From janitor to justice, how assumptions cost Morrison Financial everything. The most expensive racism in corporate history. When prejudice meets power, the fall of Morrison Financial. Dignity denied, how 30 minutes destroyed a banking dynasty. The headlines wrote themselves, each one driving another nail into Morrison Financial's corporate coffin. Legal experts weighed in on potential lawsuits. Discrimination attorneys started calling Vanessa's representatives. Civil rights organizations demanded investigations. The Federal Reserve announced they were reviewing Morrison Financial's practices. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency opened a formal inquiry. State banking regulators began asking very uncomfortable questions about institutional discrimination. Corporate sensitivity trainers found themselves overwhelmed with calls from banks, desperate to prove they weren't like Morrison Financial. Diversity and inclusion consultants started getting 7-figure contracts from institutions terrified they might be harboring their own Keisha Davis. Human resources departments across the financial sector began mandatory retraining programs, using Morrison Financial as the cautionary tale of what happens when discrimination goes unchecked. But the real devastation wasn't measured in stock prices or newspaper headlines or regulatory investigations. It was measured in human lives destroyed by the ripple effects of 30 minutes of unchecked cruelty that spread outward like circles from a stone thrown into still water. 6 months later, the full scope of the disaster became clear, painted in the stark statistics of institutional collapse. Morrison Financial was forced to close 12 branches across 3 states, not because they weren't profitable, but because they couldn't maintain the customer base necessary to keep them operational. 4,000 employees, tellers, managers, security guards, janitors, accountants, customer service representatives, loan officers, administrative assistants, IT specialists, marketing coordinators, lost their jobs, not because of anything they'd done, but because two people in one lobby had decided that cruelty was more important than professionalism. 4,000 families suddenly struggling to pay mortgages that had seemed secure just months before. 4,000 people whose lives were upended because Keisha Davis couldn't see past her own prejudices, and Marcus Thompson couldn't find the courage to do what was right when it mattered most. 4,000 workers joining unemployment lines, updating resumes, explaining to potential employers why their previous company had collapsed in scandal. The human cost was staggering. Families lost their homes when mortgage payments became impossible on unemployment benefits. Children were pulled out of private schools and extracurricular activities their parents could no longer afford. College funds were raided to pay for basic necessities. Dreams of retirement were postponed indefinitely as 401k accounts tied to Morrison Financial stock became worthless overnight. Support groups formed among former Morrison Financial employees, people trying to process the trauma of losing not just their jobs but their professional identities through no fault of their own. Career counselors reported unprecedented demand from banking professionals trying to explain employment gaps caused by institutional racism they'd had nothing to do with. Mental health professionals in cities where Morrison Financial had closed branches reported increases in depression, anxiety, and suicide attempts among former employees struggling to cope with the sudden destruction of their financial security and professional reputations. And Keisha herself? The bitter irony of her fate would have been poetic if it weren't so devastating to witness. The woman who'd spent 30 minutes mocking someone she assumed was a janitor now found herself working overnight janitorial shifts at downtown office buildings, scrubbing toilets and mopping floors for minimum wage, while struggling to keep her own children fed and housed. The job market for former Morrison Financial employees was brutal, but it was especially harsh for Keisha. Word had spread through the banking industry about exactly who was responsible for the disaster. Her name was known, her face was recognizable from the viral videos, her reputation was radioactive. No financial institution would touch her with a 10-foot pole. So she found herself pushing a cart through empty hallways at 2 a.m., wearing a uniform with someone else's company logo, doing the exact work she'd used as a weapon to destroy another woman's dignity. The cleaning company that hired her paid her $12 an hour, less than she'd made in a single hour at Morrison Financial, where she'd earned a comfortable middle-class salary with benefits, vacation time, sick leave, and a pension plan that was now worthless. Every night, as she emptied trash cans and vacuumed carpets and disinfected surfaces in buildings where people like her former self worked during the day, she was forced to confront the devastating truth of what she'd become. She was living the exact life she'd assumed Vanessa Williams was living, doing the exact job she'd mocked and belittled, experiencing firsthand the invisibility and dismissal she'd once inflicted on others. But while Morrison Financial crumbled, and its former employees struggled to rebuild their lives from the wreckage of institutional collapse, Vanessa Williams was creating something beautiful and transformative from the ashes of that terrible day. She moved her massive contract to the Minority Business Development Bank, a smaller institution that had been serving underserved communities for decades, but had never dreamed of handling accounts of this magnitude. The bank's president, Maria Gonzalez, had built her institution on the principle that everyone deserved access to quality financial services regardless of their zip code, skin color, or economic background. When Vanessa's representatives first contacted them about transferring the Williams Tech Solutions account, Maria thought it was a prank call. Banks like hers didn't get clients worth $47 billion. They served small business owners, first-time homebuyers, families building credit, students taking out loans for community college. They were the financial institution for people who'd been turned away by places like Morrison Financial. But the transfer was real, and overnight, the Minority Business Development Bank became one of the most powerful financial institutions in the country, suddenly equipped to offer loans and services to communities that had been systematically excluded from traditional banking for generations. The contract didn't just transfer money. It transferred hope and opportunity on a scale that transformed entire neighborhoods. 3,000 new jobs were created in communities that had been written off by mainstream financial institutions. Small businesses that had been denied loans for generations suddenly found themselves with access to capital that allowed them to expand, hire, and dream bigger than they'd ever imagined possible. The ripple effects spread far beyond individual loans and accounts. Property values in previously neglected neighborhoods began to rise as new businesses opened and families invested in homeownership. Schools in these areas saw increased funding as property tax revenues grew. Community centers and libraries that had been struggling with budget cuts found themselves with new resources. Local governments in cities where the Minority Business Development Bank expanded their services reported decreased unemployment, increased small business formation, and growing tax bases that allowed them to invest in infrastructure improvements that had been delayed for years due to budget constraints. Vanessa also established the Dignity in Work Scholarship Program, providing full college tuition for the children of service industry workers, janitors, housekeepers, security guards, food service employees, retail workers, home health aides, all the people whose labor keeps society functioning, but whose contributions are rarely acknowledged or respected. The scholarship came with a simple but powerful message. Every job has dignity. Every worker deserves respect, and no one's worth should be measured by other people's assumptions about their occupation. The scholarship program was revolutionary in its scope and vision. It didn't just provide tuition money. It provided mentorship, internship opportunities, career counseling, and emotional support for students who were often the first in their families to attend college. Recipients were connected with professionals in their fields of interest, given access to networks that had previously been closed to them, and supported through every step of their educational journey. Within 2 years, the program had awarded scholarships to over 500 students, pursuing degrees in everything from computer science to social work, from business administration to environmental engineering. These weren't just scholarships, they were investments in breaking cycles of economic inequality that had persisted for generations. Vanessa remained as private as ever, still avoiding interviews and public appearances, still conducting her business in boardrooms and private meetings where cameras weren't allowed and reporters couldn't intrude. But her actions spoke louder than any press conference could have. The woman who'd been dismissed as just a cleaning lady had proven that true power isn't about making yourself feel superior to others. It's about lifting others up when you have the strength and resources to do so. She never gave interviews about the Morrison financial incident. She never wrote op-eds about discrimination in banking. She never appeared on talk shows to discuss her experience or promote her scholarship program. She let her actions be her statement, her investments be her argument, her results be her response to those who'd questioned her worth. But the impact of her choices reverberated far beyond the communities that directly benefited from her business decisions. The story of what happened in Morrison Financial Bank that Tuesday morning became a case study in business schools around the world, a training video in corporate sensitivity programs, a cautionary tale about the real cost of prejudice in professional settings that was shown to millions of employees across every industry. Harvard Business School developed an entire course around the incident, exploring not just the ethical implications, but the financial consequences of institutional discrimination. Students analyzed the decision-making processes that led to the disaster, the corporate culture that enabled it, and the leadership failures that made it possible. Corporate training companies found themselves with more business than they could handle as organizations scrambled to ensure they weren't harboring their own potential disasters. Role-playing exercises based on the Morrison financial incident became standard in customer service training. Managers were taught to recognize the warning signs of employee bias and intervene before small incidents became catastrophic mistakes. The story became a touchstone for discussions about unconscious bias, institutional racism, and the importance of treating every customer with dignity regardless of their appearance or perceived status. It was referenced in congressional hearings about banking discrimination, cited in academic papers about corporate social responsibility, and used as evidence in legal cases involving workplace discrimination. But more than that, it became a reminder of something that every person needs to remember every single day of their lives, something that should be taught in schools and reinforced in workplaces, and remembered in every interaction we have with other human beings. Sometimes the janitor you mock today owns the building tomorrow. Sometimes the person emptying your trash can is the same person who could empty your bank account with a single phone call. Sometimes the individual you treat as invisible has the power to make your entire world disappear. Sometimes the quiet person in simple clothes is the one who controls more wealth than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. Keisha Davis learned this lesson in the most devastating way possible, and her story serves as a warning to anyone who thinks they can judge another person's worth based on assumptions and stereotypes. She went from mocking someone for being a cleaning lady to becoming one herself, from wielding power over others to being powerless herself, from looking down on service workers to becoming one of the people she'd once despised. But the lesson isn't just for people like Keisha, who let their bitterness and prejudice destroy their judgment. It's for all of us, who live in a world that constantly tries to rank people in hierarchies of worth, that encourages us to judge others based on what we can see, rather than who they really are. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.